illusory energy, being released from all the designations by which the living entity became entrapped. He became free by knowledge and renunciation, and by the spiritual force of his devotional service. In this way, being situated in his original constitutional position of Krishna consciousness, he gave up this body as a Prabhu, or a controller of the senses. That's a very interesting verse. Very, very interesting. Purport by His Divine Grace is Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. As stated in the Vedas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the source of material energy. Consequently, he is sometimes called Maya, or the Supreme Person, who can create his pastimes through his potency, known as the material energy. The jiva, or the individual living entity, becomes entrapped by the material energy, by the supreme will of the Supreme Personality Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita 1861, we understand Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Pridvese Vijnatistati Ramayan Sarvabhutani Yantarani Maya. Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is situated within the heart of all conditioned souls, and by his supreme will, the living entity or individual soul gets the facility to lord it over material nature in various types of bodies, which are known as yantra, or the moving vehicle offered by the total material energy, Maya. Although the individual living entity, or jiva, and the Lord are both situated within the material energy, the Lord is directing the movements of the jiva soul by offering him different types of bodies through the material energy. And thus, the living entity is wandering throughout the universes in various forms of body and becomes implicated in different situations, partaking of the reactions of fruitive activities. When Prithu Maharaja became spiritually powerful by the enhancement of his spiritual knowledge, or jnana, and renunciation of material desires, he became a Prabhu, or master of the senses, sometimes called Goswami or Swami. This means that he was no longer controlled by the influence of the material energy. When one is strong enough to give up the influence of material energy, he is called Prabhu. In this verse, the word Swarupa Staha is also very significant. The real identity of the individual soul lies in understanding or attaining the knowledge that he is eternally a servant of Krishna. This understanding is called Swarupa Labdi. Swarupa Labdi. By culturing the devotion service, the devotee gradually comes to understand his actual relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding of one's pure spiritual position is called Swarupopalabdhi. And when one attains that stage, he can understand how he is related with the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a servant or friend, or as a parent or conjugal lover. Excuse me. Excuse me. The understanding of one's pure spiritual position is called Swarup O Bhakti. And when one attains that stage, he can understand how he is related with the Supreme Personality of God as a servant or friend, or as a parent or conjugal lover. This stage of understanding is called Swarupa Staha. Prita Maharaja realized this Swarupa completely, and it will be clear in the later verses that he personally left his world or this body by riding on a chariot sent from Vaikuntha. Okay. The stage of understanding is called Swarupa Stha. Prita Maharaja realized this Swarupa completely, and it will be clear in the later verses that he personally left this world or this body by riding on a chariot sent from Vaikuntha. In this verse, the word Prabhu is also significant. As stated before, when one is completely self-realized and acts according to that position, he can be called Prabhu. The spiritual master is addressed as Prabhupada because he is completely self-realized soul. The word pada means position, and Prabhupada indicates that he is given the position of Prabhu or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for he acts on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one is a Prabhu or controller of the senses, he cannot act as spiritual master, who is authorized by the spiritual Prabhu. Authorized by the Supreme Prabhu or Lord Krishna. In his verses praising the spiritual master, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, Shakshat Paritmena Smastasastrir Uttastata Bhavyata Eva Sadbi. The spiritual master is honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord. Thus, Prita Maharaja can also be called Prabhupada, or as described herein, Prabhu. And it just shows you how significant the name Prabhu is. It's not, when we call someone else Prabhu, it's actually a very profound way of speaking about someone. Another question may be raised in this connection. Since Prita Maharaja was a power incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shaktavasha Avatar, why did he have to execute the regulative principles in order to become a Prabhu? Because he appeared on this earth as an ideal king, and because it is the duty of the king to instruct the citizens in the execution of devotional service. He followed all the regulative principles of devotional service in order to teach others. Similarly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, although Krishna himself taught us how to approach Krishna as a devotee, it is said, Apani Achari Bhakti Sikaina Sabhare. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed others in the process of devotional service by setting the example himself through his own personal actions. Similarly, Prithu Maharaj, although a Shaktavasha Avatara incarnation, still behaved exactly as a devotee in order to achieve the position of Prabhu. Nice. Furthermore, Swarupa Staha means complete liberation. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.10.6, Itvanyata Rupam Swarupena Vivastiti. When a living entity abandons the activities of Maya and attains the position from which he can execute devotional service, his state is called Swarupa Stha, or complete liberation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you very much. Okay. Text number 19. The queen, the wife of Prithu Maharaj, whose name was Archie, followed her husband into the forest. Since she was a queen, her body was very delicate. Although she did not deserve to live in the forest, she voluntarily touched her lotus feet to the ground. In other words, before that, she never touched the lotus feet to the ground. That's how pure she was. But in order to follow her husband, she was willing to touch her feet to the ground. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Because Prithu Maharaj's wife was the queen and also a daughter of the king, she never experienced walking on the ground. For queens used to never come out of the palace. They certainly never went to the forest and tolerated all the difficulties of living in the wilderness in Vedic civilization. There are hundreds of similar examples of such renunciation on the part of queens and dedication to the husband. The goddess of fortune, Mother Sita, followed her husband, Ramachandra, when he went to the forest. Lord Ramachandra went to the forest in compliance with the order of his father, Maharaja Dasaratha. But Mother Sita was not so ordered. Nonetheless, she voluntarily accepted the path of her husband. Similarly, Gandhari, the wife of King Dhritarashtra, also followed her husband into the forest. Being the wives of great personalities like Prithu, Lord Ramachandra, and Dhritarashtra, these were ideal chaste women. Such queens also instructed the general people by showing them how to become a chaste wife and follow the husband in every stage of life. When the husband is king, she sits beside him as the queen. And when he goes to the forest, she also follows, despite having to tolerate all kinds of difficulties in living in the forest. Therefore, it is said here, Atad Artha, that although she did not want to touch her feet to the ground, she nonetheless accepted all difficulties when she went to the forest with her husband. Text number 20. Although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archie followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers, and leaves. And because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet, because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she did not feel any difficulties. Wow, that's a real woman. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The words Bharta Vrata Dharma Nishtaya indicate that a woman's duty or religious principle is to serve her husband in all conditions. Oh, I don't hear any feminists screaming.
They're celebrating within.
If you read this in public, the feminists are kind of start screaming. Okay, so the words Bharta Vrata Dharma Nishtaya indicate that a woman's duty or religious principle is to serve her husband in all conditions. In Vedic civilization, a man is taught from the beginning of his life to become a brahmachari, then an ideal grihastha, then vanaprastha, then sannyasi. And the wife is taught just to follow the husband strictly in all conditions of life. After the period of brahmachari, a man accepts a householder's life, and the woman is also taught by her parents to be a chaste wife. Thus, when a girl and boy are united, both are trained for a life dedicated to a higher purpose. The boy is trained to execute his duty in accordance with the higher purpose of life, and the girl is trained to follow him. The chaste wife's duty is to keep her husband pleased in householder life in all respects. And when the husband retires from family life, she is to go to the forest and adopt the life of vanaprastha or vanavasi. At that time, the wife is to follow her husband and take care of him, just as she took care of him in household life. But when the husband takes the renounced order of life, namely sannyasa, the wife is to return home and become a saintly woman, an example for her children and daughters-in-law, and showing them how to live a life of austerity. Wow. Beautiful. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyasa, his wife, Vishnu Priya Devi, although only 16 years old, also took the vow of austerity due to her husband's leaving home. She made a vow never to get married with anybody else. And although she was just 16 years old, so that meant also that she would never have a child. And she would always be, what you would say, loyal to her husband, who is completely renounced. So that's pretty difficult for a woman to do. She's only 16 years old, but yet she never got married to anybody else. And she always meditated on her husband and Krishna. So it says that the chaste wife's duty is to keep her husband pleased in household life in all respects. And when the husband retires from family life, she is to go to the forest and adopt the life of a vanaprastha or vanavasi. At that time, the wife is to follow her husband and take care of him, just as she took care of him in household life. But when the husband takes the renounced order of life, namely sannyasa, the wife is to return home and become a saintly woman, setting an example for her children and daughters-in-law, and showing them how to live a life of austerity. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyasa, his wife, Vishnu Priya Devi, although only 16 years old, also took the vow of austerity due to her husband's leaving home. She chanted her beads and after finishing one round, she collected 1 grain of rice. In this way, as many rounds as she chanted, she would receive the same number of rice grains, and then cook them, and so take prashada. This is called austerity. She would only eat as many grains of rice as she chanted the mantra Hare Krishna. So if she only chanted 16, rounds, she only ate 16 pieces of the rice. But that's really severe
Wow.
tapasya. Of course, she probably ate more than just 16 pieces of rice. She probably chanted maybe 100 rounds,
Mhm.
but she only ate as many pieces of rice that she chanted on. Okay. So, but when the husband takes the renounced order of life, namely sannyasa, the wife is to return home and become a saintly woman, setting an example for her children and daughters-in-law and showing them how to live a life of austerity. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyasa, his wife, Vishnu Priya Devi, although only 16 years old, also took the vow of austerity due to her husband's leaving home. She chanted her beads, and after finishing one round, she collected 1 grain of rice. In this way, as many rounds as she chanted, she would receive the same number of rice grains, and then cook them and so take prashada. This is called austerity. Even today in India, widows or women whose husbands have taken sannyasa follow the principles of austerity, even though they live with their children. Prithu Maharaj's wife, Archie, was steadily determined to execute the duty of a wife, and while her husband was in the forest, she followed him in eating only fruits and leaves and lying down on the ground. Since a woman's body is considerably more delicate than a man's, Queen Archie became very frail and thin. Parikarshita, when one engages in austerities, his body generally becomes lean and thin. Becoming fat is not a very good qualification in spiritual life, because a person who is engaged in spiritual life must reduce the comforts of the body, namely eating, sleeping, and mating, to a minimum. Although Queen Archie became very thin from living in the forest according to regular principles, she was not unhappy, for she was enjoying the honor of serving her great husband. Wow. I don't know if there's any women like that anymore. Text 21. When Queen Archie saw her husband, who had been so merciful to her, and the earth no longer showed symptoms of life, she lamented for a little while and then built a fiery pyre on top of a hill and placed the body of her husband on it. So her husband left his body, and so she burned his body. Now let's see what she's going to do to her body. After seeing all the symptoms in her husband's stock, the queen lamented for a while. The word kinshit means for a little while. The queen was completely aware that her husband was not dead, although the symptoms of life, action, intelligence, sense perception, had ceased. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 2:13, Dehinosmin yata dehe kumaran vivanamjara. Tata dehantara bhakti dirastacham. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body, from boyhood to youth to old age, the body similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such change, which means you never really die. You might change your body, yes, but you never die. When a living entity transfers from one body to another, a process generally known as death, a sane man does not lament, for he knows that the living entity is not dead, but is simply transferred from one body to another. The queen should have been afraid of being alone in the forest with the body of her husband. But since she was a great wife of a great personality, she lamented for a while, but immediately understood that she had many duties to perform. Thus, instead of wasting her time in lamentation, she immediately prepared a fiery pyre on top of a hill and then placed the body of her husband on it to be burned. Oh, it's not easy to do such a thing for a woman. Maharaj Prithu is described here as Daita, for not only was he the king of the earth, but he treated the earth as his protected child. Similarly, he protected his wife also. It was the duty of the king to give protection to everyone, especially to the earth or land which he ruled, as well as the citizens and his family members. Since Prithu Maharaj was a perfect king, he gave protection to everyone, and therefore he is described here as Daita. Text 22. After this, the queen executed the necessary funerary functions and offered oblations of water. After bathing in the river, she offered obeisances to various demigods situated in the sky in the different planetary systems. She then circumambulated the fire and, while thinking of the lotus feet of her husband, entered its flames. She's a real devotee. She is doing, what is it called? Anyway, her husband died. That means she has to die also. The entrance of a chaste wife into the flames of the pyre of her dead husband is known as Sahagamana, which means dying with the husband. This system of Sahagamana had been practiced in Vedic civilization from time immemorial. Even after the British period in India, this practice was rigidly observed. But soon it degraded to the point that even when the wife was not strong enough to enter the fire of her dead husband, the relatives would force her to enter. Thus, this practice had to be stopped. But even today, there are still some solitary cases where a wife will voluntarily enter the fire and die with her husband. Even after 1940, we personally knew a chaste wife who died in this way. Yeah, because if her husband is dead and her children are grown, there's no reason for her to continue in this life. And she'll go to commit what was the name of that?
Sati.
Sati, yes, she'll do sati. And then she can join her husband in the spiritual world. Purport: in the entrance of a chaste woman into the flames of the pyre of her dead husband is known as Sahagamana, which means dying with the husband. This system of Sahagam had been practiced in Vedic civilization from time immemorial. Even after the British period in India, this practice was rigidly observed, but soon it degraded to the point that even when the wife was not strong enough to enter the fire of her dead husband, the relatives would force her to enter. Thus, this practice had to be stopped. But even today, there are still some solitary cases where a wife will voluntarily enter the fire and die with her husband. Even after 1940, we personally knew of a chaste wife who died in this way. Yeah, well, I'm not going to be able to convince many women today to commit suicide when their husband dies. Text 23. After observing this brave act performed by the chaste wife Archie, the wife of the great king Kritu, many thousands of the wives of the demigods, along with their husbands, offered prayers to the queen, for they were very much satisfied. At that time, the demigods were situated on top of Mandara Hill, and all their wives began to shower flowers on the funeral pyre and began to talk among themselves as follows. The wives of the demigods said, "All glories to Queen Archie. We can see that this queen of the great king Pritu, the emperor of all the kings of the world, has served her husband with mind, speech, and body, exactly as the goddess of fortune served the supreme personality of Godhead, Yajnesa or Vishnu." Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, the words Yajnesam Shrir Vadur Eva indicate that Queen Archie served her husband just as the goddess of fortune serves the supreme personality of Godhead Vishnu. We can observe that even in the history of this world, when Lord Krishna, the supreme Vishnu, was ruling over Dwarka, Queen Rukmini, who was the chief of all Krishna's queens, used to serve Lord Krishna personally, in spite of having many hundreds of maidservants to assist her. Similarly, the goddess of fortune in the Vaikuntha planets also serves Narayana personally. Although there are many thousands of devotees prepared to serve the Lord, this practice is also followed by the wives of the demigods. And in days past, the wives of men also followed the same principle. In Vedic civilization, the husband and wife were not separated by such man-made laws as the divorce. We should understand the necessity for maintaining family life in human society, and should thus abolish this artificial law known as divorce. The husband and wife should live in Krishna consciousness and follow in the footsteps of Lakshmi Narayana or Krishna Rukmini. In this way, peace and harmony can be possible within this world. Yeah, divorce is not permitted in the Vedic tradition. Text 26. The wives of the demigods continue. Just see how this chaste lady, Archie, by dint of her inconceivable pious activities, is still following her husband upward, as far as we can see. Now her husband's dead, but she's still following him. Purport. Both Peter Maharaj's airplane and the airplane. I don't know if he's dead. I'm sorry. Both Peter Maharaj's airplane and the airplane carrying Queen Archie were passing out of the vision of the ladies of higher planetary systems. These ladies were simply astonished to see how Prita Maharaj and his wife achieved such an exalted position. Although they were the wives of the denizens of the higher planetary system, and Prita Maharaj was an inhabitant of an inferior planetary system, the Earth, the king, along with his wife, passed beyond the realms of the demigods and went upward to Vaikuntha Loka. The word Urdhvam, upward, is significant here. For the ladies speaking were from the higher planetary systems, which include the moon, sun, and Venus, up to Brahmaloka, or the highest planet. Beyond Brahmaloka is the spiritual sky, and in that spiritual sky there are innumerable Vaikuntha lokas. Thus, the word Urdhvam indicates that the Vaikuntha planets are beyond or above these material planets, and it was to these Vaikuntha planets that Prita Maharaj and his wife were going. This also indicates that when Prita Maharaja and his wife Archie abandoned their material bodies in the material fire, they immediately developed their spiritual bodies and entered into the spiritual airplanes, which could penetrate the material elements and reach the spiritual sky. Since they were carried by two separate airplanes, it may be concluded that even after being burned in the funeral pyre, they remained separate individual persons. In other words, they never lost their identity or became void as imagined by the impersonal. The ladies in the higher planetary system were capable of seeing both downward and upward. When they looked down, they could see that the body of Prita Maharaj was being burned and that his wife Archie was entering into the fire. And when they looked upward, they could see how they were being carried in two airplanes to the Vaikuntha lokas. All of this is possible simply by Durvibhavyena Karmana, inconceivable activity. Prita Maharaja was a pure devotee, and his wife Archie simply followed her husband. Thus, they can both be considered pure devotees, and thus they are capable of performing inconceivable activities. Such activities are not possible for ordinary men. Indeed, ordinary men cannot even take to the devotional service of the Lord, nor can ordinary women maintain such vows of chastity and follow their husbands in all respects. A woman does not need to attain high qualifications, but if she simply follows in the footsteps of her husband, who must be a devotee, then both husband and wife attain liberation and are promoted to the Vaikuntha lokas. This is evinced by inconceivable activities of Maharaj Pitu and his wife. Evinced means you see this. Text 27. In this material world, in this material world, every human being has a short span of life. But those who are engaged in devotional service go back home, back to Godhead, where they are actually on the path of liberation. For such persons, there is nothing which is not available. In other words, they can achieve any goal. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In Bhagavad Gita 9:33, Lord Krishna says, Anityam asukam lokam imam prapya vajasvamam. The Lord here declares that this material world is full of miseries, asukam, and at the same time is very flickering. Anityam. Flickering means not steady, it's always changing. Therefore, one's only duty is to engage himself in devotional service. This is the best end to which human life can be put. Those devotees who are constantly engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord achieve not only all material benefits, but also all spiritual benefits. For at the end of life, they go back home, back to Godhead. Their destination is described in this verse as Bhagavat Padam. And the word Padam means abode. And Bhagavat means the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, the destination of the devotees is the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this verse, the word nice karamyam, which means transcendental knowledge, is also significant. Unless one comes to the platform of transcendental knowledge and offers devotional service to the Lord, one is not perfect. Generally, the processes of jnana, yoga, and karma are executed life after life before one gets a chance to render pure devotional service to the Lord. This chance is given by the grace of a pure devotee, and it is in this way only that one can actually attain liberation. In the context of this narration, the wives of the demigods repented because although they had the opportunity of birth in a higher planetary system, a lifetime spanning millions of years, and all material comforts, they were not fortunate as Prita Maharaj and his wife, who were actually surpassing them. In other words, Prita Maharaj and his wife scorned promotion to the higher planetary systems and even to Brahmaloka because the position which they were attaining was incomparable. In Bhagavad Gita 8:16, the Lord affirms, Brahma, Bhuvanal, Loka, Punar, Avartino, Virgina, from the highest planet in the material world to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. In other words, even if one goes to the highest planet, Brahmaloka, he has to return to the miseries of birth and death. In the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita 9:21, Lord Krishna also asserts, Te tam bhukva swargalokam vishalam, shine punye martilokam vishanti. When they have thus enjoyed the heavenly sense pleasure, and they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, after exhausting the results of pious activities, one has to come again to the lower planetary systems and begin a new chapter of pious activities. It is therefore said in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.12, Nice Karyam api achuta bhava varjitam. The path of liberation is not at all secure unless one attains this devotional service of the Lord. Even if one is promoted to the impersonal Brahmajyoti, he runs every chance of falling down into the material world. If it is possible to fall down from the Brahmajyoti, which is beyond the higher planetary systems in this material world, then what can be said of the ordinary yogis and karmis who can only be elevated to the higher material planets? Thus, the wives of the denizens of the higher planetary system did not very much appreciate the results of karma, jnana, and yoga. Yeah. They don't want to be, as they say in English, shortchanged. Text 28. Any person who engages himself within this material world in performing activities that necessitate great struggle and who, after obtaining a human form of life, which is a chance to attain liberation from miseries, undertakes the difficult tasks of fruitive activities, must be considered to be cheated and envious of his own soul. Yeah, so after having some, let's say, uh, experience with genuine devotees, if a person goes back to mundane life, it is very, very, let's say, insulting to the devotees. Okay, so in this material world, people are engaged in different activities simply to achieve a little success and sense gratification. The karmis are engaged in performing very difficult activities. And thus they open gigantic factories, build huge cities, make big scientific discoveries, etc. In other words, they are engaged in performing very costly sacrifices in order to be promoted to the higher planetary systems. Similarly, yogis are engaged in achieving a similar goal by accepting the tedious practice of mystic yoga. So, tedious practice means practice that is very difficult. Similarly, yogis are engaged in achieving a similar goal by accepting the tedious practices of mystic yoga. Jnanis are engaged in philosophical speculation in order to gain release from the clutches of material nature. In these ways, everyone is engaged in performing very difficult tasks simply for the gratification of the senses. All of these are considered to be engaged in sense gratificatory activities or vishaya because they all demand some facility for material existence. Actually, the results of such activities are temporary. As Krishna himself proclaims in Bhagavad Gita 7:23, Antavatu phalam te sam. The fruits of those who worship the demigods are limited and temporary. Thus, the fruits of the activities of the yogis, karmis, and jnanis are ephemeral, meaning temporary. Moreover, Krishna says, Tad bhavanti alpamedasam. They are simply meant for men of small intelligence. The word vishayi denotes sense gratification. The karmis flatly state that they want sense gratification. The yogis also want sense gratification, but they want it to a higher degree. It is their desire to show some miraculous results through the practice of yoga. Thus, they strive very hard to achieve success in becoming smaller than the smallest or greater than the greatest, or in creating a planet like Earth, or as scientists by inventing so many wonderful machines. Similarly, the jnanis are also engaged in sense gratification for their interest, for they are simply interested in becoming one with the Supreme. Thus, the aim of all these activities is sense gratification to a higher or lower degree. The bhaktas, however, are not interested in sense gratificatory practices. They are simply satisfied to get an opportunity they cannot obtain because they are purely engaged in the service of the Lord. And I'm sorry. The bhaktas, however, are not interested in sense gratificatory practices. They are simply satisfied to get an opportunity to serve the Lord, although they are satisfied in any condition. There is nothing they cannot obtain, because they are purely engaged in the service of the Lord. The wives of the demigods condemn the performers of sense gratificatory activities as vanchita, cheated. Those so engaged are actually killing themselves, atmaha. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 11:2017, Nri deham adyam sulabam, sudur labam, plavam sukalpam, guru karnadaram, mayanuku lena na pasvateritam, pumam bhava bhava dim na taretsa atmasha. When one wants to cross the large ocean, he requires a strong boat. It is said that this human form of life is a good boat by which one can cross the ocean of nescience or ignorance. In the human form of life, one can obtain the guidance of a good navigator, the spiritual master. One also gets a favorable wind by the mercy of Krishna. And that wind is the instructions of Krishna. The human body is the boat. The instructions of Lord Krishna are the favorable winds. And the spiritual master is the navigator. The spiritual master knows well how to adjust the sails to catch the winds favorably and steer the boat to its destination. If, however, one does not take advantage of this opportunity, one wastes the human form of life. Wasting time and life in this way is the same as committing suicide. I'm going to write a book about suicide. The word love, Vavargyam, is significant in this verse because, according to Jiva Goswami, Abhavaryam, or the path of liberation, does not refer to merging into the impersonal Brahman, but to Salokyadi Siddhi, which means attaining the very planet where the Supreme Personality of Godhead resides. There are 5 kinds of liberation, and one is called Sayujya Mukti, or merging into the existence of the Supreme, or the impersonal Brahman effulgence. However, since there is a chance of one's falling down again into the material sky from the Brahman effulgence, Srila Jiva Goswami advises that in this human form of life, one's only aim should be to go back home, back to Godhead. The words sa varchita indicate that once a person has obtained the human form of life, he is actually cheated if he does not make preparations to go back home, back to God. The position of all devotees who are not interested in going back to Godhead is very much lamentable. For the human form of life is meant for executing devotional service and nothing else. Okay, so we're almost finished. Are there any questions anyone has? We covered a lot of verses, a lot of important statements. And any questions? How about in the outside world? Are there any questions?
So, Maharajji, when a wife becomes sati with the husband, then she go in the same pati lok. So, is there a lok except from Krishna lok? Means we know about the Pitralok, they do the puja for that. But if pati go in Pet, Pisach, so there's the puja for pati lok, for husband, wife, both.
If Pati goes to Pisach, look, Wife also goes.
Company in the misery.
I think they'll go together, right? No matter where they go.
But
That's the whole desire of.
because in India they don't have Pitra Paksha. They do puja for Pitra, but not Pati.
I'm trying to find the answer.
I think they said like their planes were separate. Still, like when she went into fire, the planes were separate after. Like they were going up, the planes of Prithvi Maharaj and
On that Pati
Pati.
always go in Goloka. If Patni will sati with Pati.
Yeah, that is the duty, right? I mean, by doing sati, she's also perfected herself.
Yes.
So wherever the husband goes, wife will also go.
Problem is where the husband go.
Well, traditionally, the entrance of a chaste wife in the flames of the fire of the dead husband is known as Saha Kamana, which means dying with the husband. This system of Saha Kamana had been practiced in Vedic civilization from time immemorial. It was practiced for millions of years. Even after the British period in India, meaning after the British left, this practice was rigidly observed. But soon it degraded to the point that even when the wife was not strong enough to enter the fire of her dead husband, the relatives would force her to enter the fire. Thus, this practice had to be stopped. But even today, there are still some solitary cases where a wife will voluntarily enter the fire and die with her husband. Even after 1940, we personally knew of a chaste wife who died in this way. Does that answer your question? In other words, this sacrifice of the wife of a genuine advanced devotee, the wife does not die anymore. Used to be that she would die. She would voluntarily die to be with her husband. But nowadays, it's not practiced. So you're lucky. You don't have to die if you're with your husband. Okay. Any other?
If we go at a wife sati with a husband, then it's a suicidal case. On that case, wife will go in Pret Yoni. So how this Pati Lok is mentioned in this Vedas? Because we know if we do with God's choice, we accept our death, then it's good. But if we own self, we decide to means sati, so it's we will go in Pret Pisach Yoni. It's similar like a suicide.
Well, in modern times, the Pati Lok was stopped. Okay? Because the relatives were forcing the wife to commit suicide. So that was not the way it should be done. She had to voluntarily. But the family members were forcing the wife to be killed. Why? Because they wanted money or they wanted who knows what. So therefore the government stopped it. Good for you. You don't have to be forced into the fire if your husband dies.
But according to Vedas, how is it mentioned this? Now I want to die with my husband, but it's sure I will go where he will go. Maybe he will go in Goloka, I will become plate of Maharaj, because it's
It
also
all
mentioned.
depends on what you're thinking of at the moment of death. If you're thinking of going back to Godhead and chanting Hare Krishna, you go back to Goloka Vrindavan. If you're thinking of so many other things, your husband said something that you didn't like, you don't want to die, you want to have, another husband or something like that. So if you have this type of corrupt thoughts in the mind, then you don't go back to God. You have to have completely pure desire to be with your husband. And now your husband's dead, but he's not really dead. He just changed his body. So you want to be with your husband. So you also change your body, meditating on your husband. But the best thing is to meditate on Krishna and go back to God. Okay, I think we'll stop there. There's so many things we read. Where did we stop? Text 29?
28.
28, yeah. Very good. All right, my dear devotees, thank you very much. You don't have to perform sati.
Sahagama. Sati Sahagama.
You are saved.
So I have asked the elephant in the room, Maharaj.
Yeah, okay, what did the elephant say?
So what if the husband has not performed good deeds? Would the wife who commits sati reach the same planet as the husband? So that's your question, right? So it says if the husband has not performed good deeds, pap karma, the general rule in Vedic philosophy is that every soul experiences the results of their own karma. Even the most devoted person cannot change the karma of another unless they have the spiritual power or divine grace to do so. So in the case of Sati Sahagamana, if the husband has committed sinful actions and is destined for a lower loka, like Naraka Loka, then the wife's fate depends on her own karma and intentions. If she performs sati with pure devotion, scriptures like Padma Purana and Garuda Purana state that she does not go to Naraka, even if the husband does. In fact, her act of utter self-sacrifice and piety may even lessen the husband's karmic burden, though it may not completely negate it. Some Puranic texts suggest she may pull him up. Garuda Purana hints that a chaste and virtuous wife can elevate the soul of a fallen husband. If her tapas or austerity and devotion are strong enough, she may help him reach a better loka or stay in the neutral loka, like Pitruloka or Pretaloka, together until rebirth. If both have mixed karma, then they may be reborn together in a future life to exhaust residual karma. Then sati, the person who performs sati may allow the wife to gain special merit like punya and be reborn in a more spiritually advanced condition. So it's basically if the husband is already performed, then she gains the same thing. But the act of sati, if it is done with the pure devotion to the husband, then it's like a duty of the wife. That itself elevates her.
Complex form.
Yeah, exactly. If then else conditions.
Multidimensional.
Yeah, but she doesn't go back to school.
Not, I mean, if she's only thinking of, it's only higher planets. It's one of those punya papa category. Means like, in the material world only, but they go to the higher planets and lower. But only if the husband and is already thinking about Krishna, then she'll follow.
Because we can Antakalachi Mameva. Krishna says Mameva. Not the
Let's say
husband.
to follow Prabhupada's example.
Hmm.
When he was 59 years old, he left his wife, his children, and everything. They were already grown. And he took sannyas. And it was difficult in the beginning, but he didn't give up. And he was able to make many devotees and save many people from, what we call suicide, and make a huge program for Krishna consciousness. So we should follow Prabhupada's example, not try and figure out what chat.
GPT saying. Yes. Prabhupada not only liberated thousands and thousands of people, he has created the whole platform for millions of people going forward.
Yeah. He took sannyas and he maintained it, and he made so many beneficial activities, and hundreds and thousands of devotees and so forth.
But,
So we should follow his example.
Maharaj, when I was in the college, then my friends used to say to me when he saw any couples, old couples, then he saw that Richard, look, the marriage for that age. If husband is weak, then wife will support him, and wife is weak, husband will support them. Means in young age we can do our things dependently, but in old age we need our partners for marriage for that age too. So if we will be becoming old, then we will need the friends, because in that age no one will talk us, no one will help us.
Okay, translation. What she said.
So like she is saying that like so basically so like she has heard like from like college times that like the marriage is for the purpose that at the like towards the end of the life, when the husband and wife both are weak in the old days, they can help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is that like if the husband takes sannyas and like both are separated, like who will help them? Like in the old days, no one comes to help.
The son.
Oh my God. We can't trust on the
Yeah,
sun.
yeah.
You're also hearing,
In
right?
Kali Yuga, we can't depend on just on the sun. I think.
Well, make sure he becomes a devotee and I'll take care of you. You want to take care of your mother when she gets older? Yeah. Good. Remember that. If you don't, I'm going to come and spank you. I took care of my mother right up till she died. I used to change her underwear, feed her, bathe her, everything. She was, not capable of doing those things when she got really old. My brothers had put my mother into a old age home, and I went and took her out and took care of her myself until she died. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. He's your translator. So whenever you say something, he knows how to explain it.
Yeah, there are different stories. Today is a Prutu Maharaj and his wife's story. In the past, we read the Kardama Muni and Devahuti story,
Yeah.
where Kardama Muni left into the forest, but Devahuti stayed back.
Yeah, he went right away. As soon as he had one child, that was it. He left.
So I think like before the marriage itself, he put the condition that like after we get one child, then I will leave. And
Yeah, but one child, it's it.
yes.
Supreme Personality of God, Kapila Muni. Kapila Muni. So that's
Not an ordinary child.
Multifaceted examples.
Yeah, this is not a one size fits all. It's the principles that we have to think about. For us, I think Prabhupada, life is
Follow
always
Prabhupada's example. Follow his example. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. One more time. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna Putra ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai.
So Maharaj, in Prabhupada's case, Prabhupada did ask his wife whether will you give up tea or me. So she chose
She
to.
said, I'll take the tea. She was a real tough lady. Not interested at all. Yeah. There's people like that, what can you do? Obviously she was not a pure devotee.
Yeah.
So he didn't waste his time. He just washed his hands and took sannyas. But he did take care of his wife after he left. And a little bit his sons also, by giving them money. He didn't completely cut them off. The Prabhupada, he was an ideal person. Very, very ideal person. Hare Krishna. Okay, well,
Maharaj, after spending such years, and that time Prabhupada realized that she is a typical lady.
Translation?
Okay,
After
so basically, he's like at the age of 59, right? He took sannyas. So like she's asking like, why he waited till the age of 59?
Why what?
Why did he wait till the age of 59? Like why did he realize at that age?
20-30 years he was being with the association of his wife.
No, he realized it a while ago, but he had to perform his responsibilities, and then eventually. That's why this is also a lesson, right? Like you can't just because we realize something that, but we have to still perform the current
Krishna
duties.
made it easy for him, though. Right? He made him bankrupt.
Actually, he tried so many businesses.
Yeah, when you're bankrupt, then you can't maintain anybody.
So he had a desire, and he was like basically just fulfilling his duties. And then he saw that okay, now I can.
Now is the time.
Because like she was not a devotee, right?
Was wife?
No.
She's a devotee in a sense.
The traditional way.
But she liked to drink coffee.
Or tea.
Or tea. Yeah.
So like in Nilamil, like there's a message that when there was like kirtan happening, and like Prabhupada wanted her wife to come, but she would not come. She would like just sit in the room and drink tea.
She was a typical Hindu wife. Doesn't listen to her husband. Actually, they learned that the Hindu women learned that from the American women. Don't care what your husband says. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare. Hare Ram. Ram Ram. Hare Hare.
You are our poster child. We gotta take a video of him.
Yes. Yeah, we should.
Chanting is the best.